Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Hi, my name is Keeshea Turner Roberts, and I am assistant professor at Delaware Law School. What I want to talk to you guys about tonight is the invisible within the invisible, why intersectionality is not an option. All right, so I'm going to tell you that I'm a professor, and I will have some times for you guys to do some reflections, and then I will have you to have some questions for you to think about throughout this presentation. How I like to start my classes, I like to start with a quote that I think is relevant. Here's one of them. This is by Audre Lorde, who is a poet, a queer advocate, a badass person. She really is, she was. And so this quote, I think, encapsulates what I want to talk about tonight. And it's, there's no such thing as a single issue because we do not live single issue lives. These words from this esteemed poet helps us identify and reminds us rather that identity is complex and multifaceted. Today, we explore how compound forms of discrimination can often go unaddressed in policies and in movements. Many policies and movements categorize people into boxes, so that people of color, people living with disabilities, the queer community, and low-income communities. But in reality, it's more complex. Some individuals exist within those intersections of multiple identities, facing compound forms of discrimination where many policies and movements fail to address. I call these pockets of these individuals, I call them the marginalized within the marginalized. By the end of this talk, I want you to be able to do the following. First, identify who's often invisible in these movements and policies. Secondly, to understand how compound discrimination operates in real life. And lastly, begin to think about solutions that center intersectionality by design. How I go about doing that, I like to introduce you to some people that I know, okay? I want you to meet Danielle. Danielle is a Black woman. She's a transgender Black woman. She navigates society, often sees her as disposable. She faces both racism and transphobia every day. So in our system right now, we have 63% of Black transgender women who face multi-layered of violence due to the gender identity, gender, and race comprised of 63% of all victims of fatal violence against transgender and gender nonconforming individuals. Danielle is not a statistic. She's not, right? She's someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who has dreams and aspirations, right? And also some individual, some person whose rights are not being respected or has not been recognized by anyone. And then I want you to meet Carlos. Carlos is Hispanic. He is an immigrant trying to navigate the very difficult immigration system, as well as he's disabled. He also experienced ableism and xenophobia. In a study, a 2023 study, where they look at immigrant families and how they're reporting the material hardship, the majority of these families, around 60% of them, do experience some type of hardship, material hardship. It could be food insecurity, it could be unmet needs with Medicaid, it could be a variety of different things. When you're thinking about developing policies, and so when you deal with someone like Carlos, what type of policies and laws are you going to create? Are you going to create policies dealing with immigration only? Or are you going to deal with policies dealing with ableism and providing services for the disabled? Because I could tell you a lot of disability associations or disability organizations, they don't necessarily think about accessibility. They think about accessibility, but don't think about immigration. But a lot of immigration policymakers and policies, they don't think about accessibility. Okay, so people who are like Carlos are going to be left out of receiving those services because he's within those intersections. And lastly, I want you to meet Maria. Maria is Black, single mother of two, living in a low-income neighborhood. She relies heavily on public assistance to cover her childcare expenses so she can maintain a part-time job and attend school. Policies that are being developed and rules are being developed within her family and her particular family in mind are not present. There aren't any, right? And so a lot of the policies, they don't see her, they see her family is not the ordinary or not the average family, right? And so policies are being developed focused on what's called the nuclear family, right? And these families are the ideal families. But what if you don't qualify or you don't fit that mold? There are 7.3 million single mothers according to a 2023 study, and of those 7.3 million individuals, 28% live at poverty level. I would like to talk about these individuals, as I said before, I like to call them marginalized within the marginalized. These are the individuals that kind of are in the middle, right? These are the individuals who have, who fit into multiple identities. And so these are the individuals who are often left out of policies and process. With regards to whether or not someone's intersectionality or whether there is any marginalization, that's nothing new. Historical movements and policies have often centered the average individual, which truly doesn't really exist, marginalized person, and leave those at those intersections to be invisible, okay? So what I see the problem is that we are looking at how to advocate on behalf of these individuals. We're looking at single issues, like we only deal with one set of identities, right? And so what I mean by that is, for instance, gender queer advocacy, it centers usually on white cisgender experiences, which leaves Black trans women like Danielle and other trans people of color behind. Okay, or like immigration reform that ignores accessibility and leaving disabled immigrants like Carlos stranded. And also welfare reform that assumes that a nuclear family model is the only appropriate model and penalizes those Black and brown families that don't fit that mold, such as Maria. As a teacher at heart, I like to think about identities in a variety of different ways. This is one way that I talk to my students about identity, right? So as you can see by this Venn diagram that there's multiple identities. There's race, there's personality, there's appearance, there's age, right? And you also can see how these bubbles are overlapping with each other. Where we are overlapping is what I like to call the intersectionality, right? Where these individuals can have multiple identities and be still disadvantaged. Some entities will disadvantage more than other identities, right? And so I really like to talk about this, especially in my law and poverty class. We really talk about how policies and laws who are created to be really neutral, but in essence are not neutral, or how they impact the people within these intersections. What I like to do is a call for action, right? Action, guys, action, right? So what can we do? Turner Roberts, you identified the problem. Okay, now what? What do you want us to do, right? And so if we really want to make the society and to be equitable, I think that we have to intentionally think in a sectionality way to really tack in, but not tack on, meaning that you have to create policies and process with intersectionality in mind and not just tack it on as an afterthought. Right? So you imagine, how can we do that? How is that possible? Okay, well, for policymakers, stop legislating for the average person. Again, that average person does not exist, right? You can also use impact assessments to account for multiple identities. Meaning, if you're going to do a policy or a study, you need to get more different types of identities to have a fuller and a more complete study. Right? So there's an organization called Sister Song, which is a collective of women of color that really focuses on reproductive justice. And they're dedicated to really education and really allowing the experiences of the community to be heard and to be implemented in potential policies. And so I think that this organization really takes intersectionality and making sure that all voices are being heard within the policy development process. So I think they're a very good example of that. For advocates, I think that you need to center the voices of the most quiet, the most invisible members, right? And ensure that your leadership, your programming, and your resources reflect intersectionality realities. A great example of that is Brave Spaces Alliance. They are a Black-led, trans-led queer community center, and they're in Chicago. And they develop a community activist approach, meaning that they use their community members to really design services for the community, right? And they provide these services for free, and they provide support. And again, what I think is really unique about them is that really everything they do is community sourced from the community, right? Developed by the community to be used for the community, which I think is awesome. And lastly, for all of us, we must ask who the marginalized before we can ask who is invisible within that group, okay? And when you conduct research, design, programming, teach, or aggregate data, I think please consider the overlapping vulnerabilities. And I think a great organization, again, out of Texas, is a nonprofit called the Invisible Project. And that project really tells stories, narratives, powerful narratives, and photographs of people who are often overlooked and marginalized individuals, such as people with disabilities, the HIV population, and the like. They really structured their work so the people themselves can be able to speak themselves. They can tell their own story through narrative or through visuals, right? And so I think they are really taking the lead on really having the marginalized within the marginalized speak for themselves. Now, as a professor, I have to have you guys to reflect, all right? So who in your own work or your own community might be visible within the invisible? What small steps can you take today to make systems, policies, or movements more inclusive? Again, these are not abstract exercises. They determine real-life outcomes, right? Who lives safely, who has access to resources, and ultimately, who's get left behind. And so what I start with before with a quote, I like to end with that same quote. Okay, and so there is no such thing as a single issue because we do not live single issue lives. How can we ask for equity when we don't take these individuals into consideration? And so I ask you, please think about this carefully, be an advocate, be a friend to those who are marginalized within the marginalized, and I'll see you in the fight. Thank you.